Welcome to Practical Shamanism. I'm Katie Weatherup. I'm a former engineer with 20 years of experience working as a shamanic practitioner, and I hope to help you to connect to your personal power and magic and to support you in living a really good life that just keeps getting better. Thank you so much for joining me. Now that we've covered the lengthy intro in part 1 to dismantling addiction, I want to move on to the actual protocol that my guides have given me. And the idea with this is to give you a third option, because in dealing with an addiction that you want to get rid of, it's probably just been a power struggle. So, the classic analogy that people use of angel on one shoulder, devil on the other. Responsible adult on one shoulder, inner child wanting pleasure and joy on the other. And these two parts have basically been fighting with each other all the time. The adult saying, no, don't do the thing. And the other part going, no, I really want it. And that tension is a huge energy leak. It's exhausting to be arguing with yourself and at war with yourself and rationalizing the thing and arguing with the rationalizations all the time. So that's super tiring. And if that was going to work, it would have gotten you there. So this protocol from the guides literally gives us a third possibility where we don't have to be arguing or in a power struggle with ourselves, where we take both those sides and say, okay, I get that this is important to each of you, and we're going to pick a middle road that honors some of the needs of both of you. And the real power of this intervention is it takes you off autopilot in an addiction. And so even if you consume or use the substance, you're moving yourself forward to new possibilities. So you've introduced choice, because a lot of times with addictions, it runs on autopilot. We're pouring the glass of wine or grabbing the candy bar or grabbing the cigarette before we even stop to think. That's how addiction really works in the brain chemistry. Before we even notice we have a feeling or anxiety, we're moving to mitigate it. And again, worked really well for hunter-gatherer people who just did things that were on the side of survival without really thinking about them. Hard on modern people when we have these things introduced that hack our chemistry but cause negative health effects, negative relationship effects, a gambling addiction, a spending addiction. It could be the dopamine that you get from buying something online. This will work for that as well. So in terms of moving forward with this, whenever you notice that you're having the impulse to use or take the action that you would eventually like to not be taking, the first step is to really celebrate that. Because often we don't have conscious awareness, and if you have conscious awareness, you can sit down and bring your wise person to the surface to mediate between your responsible adult who wants you to have good long-term health and delayed gratification and good habits that are supportive for the life that you want to create, and the part of you that wants the pleasure in the moment, that is frightened of the emotionality that might arise if you don't have your coping mechanism. So do a little dance, give yourself a thumbs up, just do something to really praise yourself for noticing, because if you can get it out of autopilot again, we just introduce choice and movement and new possibilities, and things can shift very, very quickly. So one of the steps I'd recommend to help you with the pause is to find a way to put the thing that you use unconsciously in a way that's a little bit harder to get to. So if you have a bottle of wine, if it's in the refrigerator, it goes to the back of the refrigerator with 5 things in front of it. Or your pack of cigarettes is maybe in a locked box with a combination on it. Or your credit card, you take out the auto pay on credit cards for online shopping, so you have to manually put the information in, and you put your credit card in an envelope away from your computer or phone where you have to go get it out of the back of the cupboard. For my aforementioned chocolate almond excess habit, I just moved the chocolate almonds to different cupboards that made no sense. They were in with the glasses, but it interrupted because I wasn't just going to the same cabinet. I had to remember that I'd moved them, and that gave me a chance to pause. And you can even write your intentions on a little note and put it with the object that's involved in the addiction that reminds you of what you're planning to do. So step number 1 is just to create a pause. And then what's powerful about this protocol is you're going to make a deal with yourself, much like parents are saying, yes, honey, you can have ice cream, but you have to eat your protein first. Or, you have to do your chores before we read the story. There's the do the responsible thing, and then you can have the pleasurable thing. They call this temptation bundling. So for me, one of my tricks to get myself to exercise more is to try to get into a series on Netflix that I only allow myself to watch while I'm on the elliptical machine, because my desire to see what happens next in the story encourages me to make time to exercise. So there's a lot of power in this strategy. And because it's something that a part of you wants really, really badly, getting a yes if is going to make it a lot more willing to come to the table. And so one of the tricks in terms of this agreement where you do something before you indulge in the thing that you're addicted to is to make it not so onerous that you end up not doing it. So if you required of yourself a 20-minute meditation before a glass of wine while you were already sitting on some emotionality that you were trying to numb, that is pretty impossible for the average person to sustain. If you can, more power to you. But for the part that we're dealing with addiction, something that's in the 3 to 5 minute range is pretty attainable. Sometimes it's only a 1 minute kind of thing, but having something that you interrupt with. And so there are a lot of different ways that you can go about this, and you can do some research and development and find out what interrupt is really, really supportive for you. So for example, if it's food related or smoking or alcohol, one of the things that may be going on is just an attempt to calm the fight or flight system. So you might do 4 rounds of the 4-7-8 breath as a starting place. You breathe in for a count of 4, hold for a count of 7, breathe out for a count of 8, pause, repeat the cycle 4 times. This is going to hack the fight or flight system and interrupt it. Another interrupt is we release happy chemicals when we smile. And so having a timer on your phone, setting it for 30 seconds and just plastering a smile on your face. It doesn't have to be authentic. It could be one that would scare small children if they saw it. You're just moving your face into that configuration. That is another hack. There's a delightful TED Talk on how body language influences chemistry. So they literally had people respond with more confidence and things like that in a stressful interview situation if they'd spent a minute with their shoulders back, standing up straight. There's this particular pose. So you might check out the TED Talk and say, okay, I'm just going to stand in a power pose for a minute or 2 minutes, and then I can go have the thing. So you've already changed your chemistry in a holistic way. And then the next thing would be, with that deal with yourself, to say, okay, I'm going to do the intervention that I've decided on, and then I'm going to check in with myself if I still want the thing. So this could look like, I wander blithely into the kitchen to grab some chocolate-covered almonds. It's not in the drawer I originally had it in. I'm like, oh, that's right, I'm trying to interrupt this process. So I do some deep breathing or a minute of high-intensity exercise, or take some breaths, or I ask myself, am I bored? Am I numbing emotions? There are all these different interventions that I could have. So I do the intervention that I've agreed with myself with. And if you're really, really stuck, sometimes having a couple and giving yourself a choice is helpful. Again, it may seem silly, but going back to the wrangling a small child strategies are pretty good. All right, honey, it's time to get your body clean. You can have a bath or a shower. Which one do you want? There's this injecting choice, but controlled choice for children is really effective because it disrupts that straight up power struggle and affects the brain differently. So you can be like, okay, what do I want to do? What would feel good? Do I want to do the 4-7-8 breath? Do I want to have a pad with a journal right by my drug of choice? And do I want to just journal for 1 minute on what feelings are up for me that I'm reaching for this? Do I want to do something that gets my heart rate up? Do I want to do a power pose? Do I want to put a smile on my face? Do I want to, you could pick all of these other things. And then after you've completed the intervention, the deal is, if I still want it, I'll go ahead and have it. But check in with yourself. Have that pause where you've taken the breaths and you can check in. Do I still really, really, really want the thing? And if there's a howling, kicking, screaming, absolutely, I cannot make myself not have it, have the thing. But what I would recommend as you do that is to embrace moderation. So maybe instead of grabbing a whole candy bar or a whole bag of chips, you grab a smaller portion, or maybe it's a half a glass of wine. And then the deal with yourself is, if you want another half a glass of wine subsequently, you rinse and repeat. You go through the whole process again. And it's possible that you'll end up walking away. You'll end up doing the intervention, taking a few breaths, getting really present with yourself and being like, no, the acuteness of my desire for this has waned. I still have a sort of habitual longing, but yeah, I guess I don't really need it. And you walk away. And then you can come back 5 minutes later and start the whole process over again. So you're not upsetting the part of you that feels like it needs the thing to survive by telling it, no, you can never have this. Even people who are, way beyond addiction, have been sober for a really long time. It's not everyone who thinks this way, but there's a piece of knowledge that says, yeah, sobriety is what works for me now. Because there's something triggering about saying, never ever will alcohol pass my lips again, even when on the inside they're like, wow, sobriety is so much better. I love being sober. It works for me so well. That story about the future becomes really stressful. So you don't want to be using in the moment out of attachment to future access. And so you're just like, no, it's just right now. 5 minutes later, if I really want it, I'll check in with myself again. And we have a lot more ability to move with addiction when the tension about wanting the thing is in the lower numbers on a scale from 1 to 10. So if you're craving a 5 and that's something that you can wrangle, we're just trying to keep you out of getting to 9 or 10 territory where it becomes so stressful and so terrifying and there's so much ego death in not having the thing right now. So some of the time you may walk away. You may want to expand your intervention to something that's longer. Like initially it may feel really triggering just to give yourself a minute of something. And over time you may make more advantageous deals with yourself as you get in the habit if you never walk away. So if half the time with the chocolate covered almonds you are like, yeah, no, I really I checked in and I don't need them, that's cool. You're getting somewhere. But if 100% of the time you do the thing and then move on to it, just start to bargain for a little bit of a bigger thing, because there's a little bit of a game with yourself where you're pretending that you're going to have the thing when you go into the intervention. So I aspire to do 30 minutes on the elliptical, but I often lie to myself and tell myself just 20 minutes, or even just 5 minutes. If I hate it, I'll stop. And I'm present to that, but usually after I've done 20 minutes, flowing into the next 10 isn't a big deal, but some part of me is more resistant to the idea of 30 minutes of exercise than 20 minutes of exercise, and so I work with that. So I'm kind of giving you the overview, but it's sort of a moment where you're almost keeping a secret from yourself, that you would do this intervention and then authentically the level of tension and desperation for the thing might drop to the point that it's manageable to just be with that tension and be with that longing. The interesting thing about a craving cycle is it actually has a pretty short shelf life. A lot of cravings have a rise and fall of 5 minutes or less, and it's seldom that something can outlast a half hour. Again, Depends how addicted you are, depends how much chemistry is involved. Of course, if you're a heavy drinker or a heavy user, it's smart to wean yourself off slowly so you don't create a really abrupt detox. Like that's a wise thing to do. But in going into this, you're going to pretend, you're going to say, oh, honey, if you want the thing after I've done the intervention, yeah, we can work with that. We're just going to talk about it afterwards. So we're not having the conversation about whether we're going to have the glass of wine now. We're having the conversation about what am I feeling or how am I doing my breath? And then we'll have that conversation in a minute. And then when you have the conversation, you see what arises. And if you do go forward and have the thing, if you're doing this process, you're probably on a destiny path. And if you stick with it, if you stick with this process, it's very likely you're on a destiny path of not having the thing, of not having it have the grip on you, of being able to let go of it and not miss it and enjoy the tremendously greater health and freedom and quietness of your head and all the cool things that come to you in a really graceful way. So if you do the intervention and on that particular day, this part of you is still screaming for the thing and you have the thing, savor it, like slow down, really taste it, really feel it, really be present with it, really pay attention to if you hit the enough place. Because if you slow down, like I wasn't eating those chocolate covered almonds in a thoughtful way. I wasn't like stopping and savoring the magnificence and magic of the complexity of the flavors of chocolate combined with nut and salt and, everything that was going on. I wasn't extracting the pleasure from them. I was stuffing them in my mouth on the go. I was eating and walking at the same time. So get really present. And then this is an opportunity, again, where we're having custody of the mind for the part of you that wants to shame you and make you bad and wrong and yell at you for doing the thing, to say, no, 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 you had your turn. I got really present with the breathing or the journaling or the intervention, and that was your time. This is the time for the part of me that really wants the thing to savor it. No shame, no guilt. I'm just going to really, really, really enjoy it and be present with it. The interesting thing about this is you may find that you don't like it as much as you think you do. And it's, again, this is another place where you're kind of wanting to keep a secret from yourself. But if you, say, have had low quality chocolate and really tuned in, it might not be as tasty as you think it is. On the other hand, high quality chocolate is a wonderful thing. Maybe if you're really tasting a cigarette, you'll be like, I actually don't like that as much as I thought I did. Our attachment to these things isn't very contemporary, it isn't very up to date. And so the invitation is to just really be 100% in the experience, giving it to yourself, fully savoring it, being present to when you're satiated, and then moving on to the next thing. So why not extricate all the reward chemistry so a smaller amount will get you the results that you want? People don't tend to overindulge in things as much if they're incredibly present and slowing down and being with every second of the wonderfulness of the experience and truly savoring it. And savoring is one of the ways to really promote happiness. So you can also use the savoring technique to expand your pleasure in your life. So it's great to savor the blueness of the sky or the beauty of a sunset or the magnificence of a tree or the sweetness of the smile of someone you love. Like adding savoring into your life all the way around is going to be really healthy for you. And just make sure you're not only savoring the thing that you're trying to give up, because you don't want to give yourself, I only get present with myself. I only savor something when I'm doing something with the thing I'm addicted to. So in working with this, you get present and you create a pattern interrupt, which is incredibly valuable in unwinding addiction. So if you're willing to just get present this much, and again, the hard thing is often there's so much shame that we don't want to be particularly present when we're enjoying the thing we've told ourselves over and over and over again we shouldn't have. And I just want to encourage you that the custody of the mind that says, nope, we made a deal with ourselves. This is research and development. We're trying this thing. if it doesn't work for you, like give it a week, give it a try, do it every time. If it doesn't work, lots of wisdom on breaking addiction. Humans have this problem a lot. Move on to someone else's wisdom, try something else. But the power of being able to say, no, this is the technique I'm trying right now. And again, this works better if you have some grace with your body, if you're really at risk for legal consequences or physical ailment consequences, and there's very, very little availability for your body to roll with this. This might or might not be the best strategy. If you're really stuck, it might be the thing that gets you unstuck, but this is more for the hasn't crashed the health yet, but can see the writing on the wall, hasn't crashed finances yet, but can see the writing on the wall, that kind of intervention where running your addiction a little further for the sake of grace and interrupting it isn't going to cause you appreciable harm. It won't make an appreciable difference. So giving yourself the custody of the mind that says, no, I'm not going to shame myself just for the week while I'm trying this as a research and development project. And that's another sort of mental discipline to be able to honor being in this experience. So there's a lot here. There's a lot that happens. There's a lot of opportunity to rewire. If you're setting your intent to release an addiction and you ask for help from the universe and your guides, there's tremendous support that comes with that. And you really want to put your inner wise person in the driver's seat in navigating this, because the control-y pants adult who feels like, there's no value in anything that isn't productivity and work and you have to be a perfectionist isn't a good CEO. They're not a good part to have at the helm. And likewise, the child that just wants to play and indulge and have pleasure doesn't have the responsible perspective. You need that higher perspective that really authentically honors both aspects and is helping them to come into a more collaborative relationship. Now, let's say you do this for a while and you are getting your intensity around the longing and the craving for something down to a manageable level. Because if you're getting up into the 9 or 10 in the absolute desperation, I would argue that there's inner work to do to keep you out of those realms. When you're desperate for something and feel like you'll die if you don't have it, it's very, very, very hard to take that away without doing some inner work that addresses how loud and stressful it is inside of you. When the addiction becomes a triage in a moment of desperation, it's harder. It doesn't mean don't do the intervention. Like, it's not going to hurt you to do some deep breathing when you're in that really acute space. But if it is that intense, you may still move with it. Again, you may want to have a game where you write out the craving. You're like, all right, I'll check back in 5 minutes or 10 minutes, because this could reduce the amount of whatever it is massively. And that's going to be a win if your body's working with less cigarettes or less alcohol or less sugar or less addictive buying on Amazon or less gambling or less, whatever it is that you've gotten involved in that isn't supportive for the vision you have for your life. There's going to be relief. There's going to be improvement, which is wonderful. So once you kind of make some headway with this, one thing I do want to recommend is that for a lot of people who've suffered with addiction, eventually abstinence rather than moderation is going to be your friend. And again, this is just something where don't look at this head on. Kind of lie to yourself. Pretend this isn't true. I'm speaking to the wise part of yourself that sees the destiny path, because I don't want to freak out the parts of you that are holding on to this. But once you get off those edges, once you interrupt the pattern, once you've used this process a little bit and you've started to get it to a more manageable level, the advantage of getting everything out of the house or not available and having abstinence is that you're not arguing with yourself. So the truth of it is, as long as I'm having sugar, there's a part of me that's always arguing for sugar. And that can be manageable. It's not like it screams and howls and I feel like I'll die if I don't eat the piece of chocolate. And yet there's a mental process of discussing with myself multiple times a day how much of a chocolate budget I want to give myself based on how my health is feeling, how my energy is feeling, whether I'm starting to spin out, blah, 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 blah. There's a whole list of distinctions I have to make a responsible decision about how much chocolate I can give myself in my life. And that's okay when I'm using this example, but the sugar addiction has never been an out of control, incredibly intense addiction. It's not like drinking till I'm blackout drunk. And I don't mean to make light of it. I think it's a spectrum, but the amount of harm it's doing in my life and the amount of control I have over it makes it more viable to choose that. And yet I still pay a price because of my tendency to have that be loud. It talks to me in the kitchen. So having chocolate in the house necessarily means there's a little voice going, is now a good time for chocolate? Is now a good time for chocolate? And that's probably going to be true if you have cigarettes or alcohol or anything that you've really struggled with. So it's just an invitation to try something again. I wouldn't tell yourself forever, but giving yourself a break and recognizing that we don't really come out of relationship to things for a period of time. So some people get sober for like 30 days, but that isn't really enough time for their body to rewire and all the things to realign. So they actually kind of never get to experience what full sobriety would be like because of the lag time. I'm making up a number. I don't know exactly what it is, but just consider a 90-day abstinence after you've done this protocol, because if you just jump into that, that's hard. But if you work with this first, it can be really helpful. And you may find that it just really falls away quickly with just using this protocol a couple of times, because as I shared in part 1, very, very often the things we're addicted to is outdated information for how much we want or need them. And as a child sitting with emotionality in a family that didn't have good skills or even punished you for being emotional, really acute, really terrifying. As an adult who's done some inner work, it just might not be that big a deal. You may just have an association from when you were a child that's really outdated. I work with that with exercise because, I grew up in Northern California, and for the presidential, fitness exam, they would make us run in like 95-degree weather. It was horrible. I hated it. There was nothing pleasant about that. But as an adult, how unpleasant exercise is nothing like it was as a teenager being forced to run in really, really hot weather. It's a different experience. I don't do that to myself. I'm not going to be getting my heart rate up into those ranges that are past aerobic exercise, and so I have this association and this reluctance to exercise based on old, outdated information. And your feeling of what it would be like not to have the cigarette or not to have the alcohol or not to buy the thing may be really out of date. And when you get the updated information, it may be a lot easier to shift. And the idea is that if you're listening to this because it's relevant to you, you may be locked into a war that you've been in for a really, really long time. And the tension and the power struggle, this exercise is like bringing in a mediator that says, yeah, I'm honoring both sides of you. Let's find a third possibility rather than the tug-of-war of abstain, use, abstain, use, abstain, use, and then beat yourself up for it, because that's just no fun. It's a painful process to be in. And for a lot of these things, it creates detrimental results over time in our health, in our money, in all kinds of outcomes. And so I'm all about grace and self-compassion and kindness, and I would love to invite you to try this. My guides are huge fans of it and have indicated that it's an incredibly powerful way to break an addiction without having to simply white-knuckle abstinence while there's a part of you that's still deeply, deeply invested in access to the thing that it thinks it needs. So we're sort of growing up that part of ourselves and working with it before we take away what it thinks of as its security blankie. So thank you so much for listening. I hope that you find something of value for you in this. And I just really hold the vision of us all really getting to be peaceful with ourselves. I love the idea of us having it be quiet inside us and having our mind and our thinking be a good neighborhood, be a place that says pleasant things. And how we work with addiction has a lot to do with that. So I hope that this supports you in your journey. Thank you so much for joining me. To learn more about me and my work, please visit my website at handsoverheart.com. There you can join my mailing list for access to free bonus content in the members-only area. If you've enjoyed this, please consider subscribing and leaving a review. It would help me out a lot. Also, a special thank you to my patrons for your support. You offer me the time freedom to work on passion projects like this one. If you'd like to receive personal shamanic support from me and my team of guides, please consider joining my Patreon community. You'll find the link below. And again, thank you so much for listening. This is Katie Weatherup, wishing you wholeness and happiness.